There are some bonds that words can't explain, some connections that run deeper than the heart can bear. Maya never knew how it felt to truly be seen, until the day she met Kazi, until the day she found a friend in the wild, a soul as lonely as hers. But sometimes the love we find is the love we must let go of, and no one, not even the strongest hearts, can escape the inevitability of parting. In the heart of an untamed jungle, where the air was thick with the scent of earth and life, there lived a young girl named Maya. She had grown up on the edges of the wild, surrounded by towering trees, chattering birds, and the distant calls of animals she could never see but always heard. Her family had lived in a small village that thrived near the jungle's borders, a place where the paths between the human world and the wild world seemed to blur. It was here that Maya's unusual story began. At the age of 7, Maya was not like other children. While they played with dolls or spent their days running through the village, Maya often wandered alone into the forest. There was something about the jungle that called to her. Its mysterious depths, the ancient trees that whispered secrets, and the wild creatures that roamed its vast expanse. But of all the animals she saw, one in particular captivated her: a lone gorilla. The gorilla, an imposing figure with dark eyes and a powerful frame, was unlike anything Maya had ever encountered. He was called Kazi by the villagers, a name passed down through generations, though no one had ever come close to truly understanding him. Kazi was the jungle's phantom, a creature who roamed freely but avoided human contact. He was both a legend and a reality, one that sparked awe and fear in equal measure. Maya's first encounter with Kazi came on a rainy afternoon. The storm had sent everyone running for shelter, but Maya found herself drawn to the jungle's edge where the trees parted to reveal a clearing. She could barely make out his silhouette through the thick mist. But there he was, Kazi, standing, tall, his fur damp and matted from the rain. His massive frame was a sight to behold, yet his eyes, they were so human, so full of sorrow. Maya didn't run. Instead, she stood still, her breath shallow as she watched him, and then something incredible happened. Kazi, who had been so distant from humans, looked back at her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. There was no fear in Maya's heart, only a deep sense of curiosity and an inexplicable pull towards the creature before her. As the rain began to ease, Kazi took a step toward her. Maya didn't move, not even when he came close enough that she could hear the soft rustle of his massive hands against the underbrush. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze never leaving hers. The connection was immediate, unspoken, but profound. From that day forward, Maya visited Kazi every day. She would wander into the jungle alone, leaving her family behind in the village, and go to the clearing where they had first met. At first, Kazi was cautious, keeping his distance. But over time, Maya's gentle presence seemed to reassure him, and he began to trust her. They spent hours together, Maya sitting on the mossy ground while Kazi sat nearby, watching the world in silence. She would talk to him, telling him stories of her village, of the people she loved, of the things she longed for. Kazi never spoke, but his eyes seemed to understand. When Maya felt sad, Kazi would sit closer, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder, as though offering comfort. Their bond deepened in ways that Maya could never explain. She felt that Kazi understood her in a way no one else did. He knew her heart. He saw her loneliness, her quiet pain, and in return, he offered her his silent companionship. There was no judgment, no words, just an unspoken connection that transcended all barriers. But the world was not always kind to their bond. The villagers began to whisper about Maya's visits to the jungle. They spoke of the dangers of approaching Kazi, the wildness that lurked within him. Some said that he was a cursed creature, a force of nature that could never be tamed. Others feared that Maya would one day be harmed, that Kazi's strength and unpredictability would turn against her. Maya's family, particularly her father, grew concerned. He had always been protective of her, but this new friendship with a wild animal troubled him. "Maya," he said one evening, his voice tight with worry, "you need to stay away from that creature. He's dangerous. You don't understand what you're dealing with." But Maya refused to listen. She couldn't explain it, not to herself, and certainly not to her father. But there was no fear in her heart when she was with Kazi. He wasn't dangerous to her. He was her friend, her confidant, and the only one who truly understood her. She knew deep in her bones that he would never harm her. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The bond between Maya and Kazi only grew stronger. She learned to communicate with him in her own way, through gestures, expressions, and soft sounds. She could tell when he was upset, when he was content, and when he simply needed space. Kazi, in turn, began to show signs of attachment. He would bring her gifts, stones, leaves, and occasionally fruit from the jungle. He would follow her. As she walked, his large form always within her line of sight, ensuring she was safe. But life, as it always does, was not meant to stay perfect forever. One afternoon, a group of villagers set out into the jungle. They had heard stories of Kazi's growing proximity to Maya and feared that he might pose a threat. Led by Maya's father, they carried with them tools to capture the gorilla and bring him back to the village, where they could confine him and ensure his safety from the dangers of the jungle. When Maya heard the news, panic surged through her. She rushed into the jungle, desperate to find Kazi before the villagers did. She called out his name, her voice trembling with fear. She knew Kazi would be frightened. The thought of him being trapped, of being separated from her, was unbearable. She found him in the clearing, just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground. Kazi was standing there waiting. His eyes, which had always been full of understanding, now seemed distant. There was a sadness in them that Maya had never seen before, a resignation that broke her heart. "Kazi," she whispered, stepping toward him. "You have to run. They're coming for you." But Kazi didn't move. He simply looked at her, his large body still, as if he had already accepted his fate. Maya reached out to him, her hand trembling. "Please don't leave me," she begged. For a moment it seemed as though Kazi would respond. He took a step toward her, his massive hand reaching out as if to touch her face. But then, there was the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unmistakable. The villagers were close. With a final lingering look, Kazi turned and fled into the jungle, disappearing into the thick foliage. Maya stood there, her heart aching, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to follow him, to run into the jungle, after him, but she knew she couldn't. The villagers would never let her. That night Maya cried herself to sleep, the sound of Kazi's footsteps echoing in her mind. She couldn't bear the thought of him being captured, of being taken from the wild that had been his home for so long. The next day the villagers returned, their faces grim. They had found nothing. Kazi had vanished. Years passed, and the pain of losing Kazi never quite left Maya. She grew up, left the village, and traveled to the far corners of the world, seeking solace in new places. But there were moments when the air was thick with the scent of rain or the sun set in just the right way, that she would close her eyes and remember the gorilla who had been her closest friend. She would never forget the bond they shared, the way Kazi had comforted her when no one else could, the way they had communicated without words, their hearts speaking to one another in a language deeper than anything human speech could convey. And sometimes, when the world felt too heavy, when loneliness crept in once more. Maya would close her eyes and feel just for a moment Kazi's presence beside her, as if he was still watching over her, still there in the wild heart of the jungle. Have you ever experienced a bond so deep, so unspoken that it transcended words? A connection that left you changed forever, even when life forced you to let go. Kazi and Maya's story isn't just about a girl and a gorilla. It's about the friendships that shape us, the love we find in unexpected places, and the painful beauty of parting. If you've ever had to say goodbye to something or someone you couldn't bear to lose, this story is for you. Share your thoughts and reflect on the connections that have touched your soul. What would you do if you had to choose between holding on and letting go?